Let's start working on the Flexi line. We'll grab our line tool, and let's also check our snap settings. We'll go ahead and right click and make sure that we can snap to grid. Alright, from there we'll press the S key to enable snapping, and let's go ahead and draw this line right along the center of the grid. So there's the first point, there's the second, right at the origin, and then there's point 3. Now the beautiful thing about working with just 3 points is that we can skim this line much faster. So we'll take a look at that when it's time. Alright, so once the line has been made, it's now time to rename this. So that's going to be Flexi underscore line 01. Now from here on out, all objects that will be tied to this rig will have a prefix of Flexi, so we can access those objects much faster and modify them if needed. Alright, great. Now I'd highly recommend that we alt right click and choose freeze transform when we create these objects, so that in case they accidentally were to pop out of position, we could always go ahead and right click and choose transform to 0 to pop them back. So again, we alt right click to freeze, and we can alt right click to choose transform to 0 to bring these objects back. Now when we start to work with constraints, of course, those objects will be locked down, and transform to 0 isn't going to do much for us, but initially it's a good idea to go ahead and freeze these objects down. Alright, so we have our line in place. I'll press the S key to disable the snapping tool, and we'll now create our set of anchors that will lock down the bone objects tied to our line. Let's go ahead and grab a point helper. Just checking our settings here, we'll go ahead and just click to create one and right click and head over to the modify panel. Now we will be using several helpers throughout this entire rig, so it's a good idea to change their display from time to time so that we can access them much faster and so we don't get confused. So for this first one, I'm actually going to make this a center marker. So I'll uncheck cross. And let's go ahead and alt right click, grab our path constraint, and add that to our line. We know that we could also access the path constraint under the animation menu constraints. Here are all of them. Here's the path constraint. But again, by using the animate quad menu, we can get to this much faster. Alright, so since we're using a path constraint, of course there's animation on this. So we'll need to, with the object selected, use Alt and right click, and we'll need to choose delete selected animation. Alright, great. Let's go ahead and rename this object. That's going to be Flexi underscore anchor A01, and we'll rename the others alphabetically. Let's go ahead and create the others now. Let's hold down shift and we'll go ahead and drag out just a little bit here and choose OK. Now underneath the position list, if we were to scroll down, you can see that we have this percentage parameter to reposition each helper. So the first one should be set to 0, and it is. So this next one, let's go ahead and set this to 25%. Since we're creating 4 more, it's simple math. 100 divided by 4, we get 25. So now what we'll do is go ahead and hold down shift and drag out, and we'll create 3 more of these. Okay, great. So this next one, its percentage will be set to 50%, and that's very close. We'll go to the next helper and set that to 75%. And this last one, 100%. Okay, great. So take a look at this. If we were to grab the line and go to the modify panel and go to, let's say, our vertex of object level, we can grab one of these points and take a look how the helpers are going to stay locked down to this spline. So that's nice. All right, so I'll go ahead and undo that back. And again, it's time to just go in and make sure that the rest of these are renamed. So we know that the second one should be anchor B01. And then C, D, and E. So I'll pause the video and take care of the others. Alright, after they have been renamed, it's now time to create our control objects. Again, we can work with our line tool. And the first set of controls will be square curves. So we can always snap to grid. Let's press the S key. And we'll create our square. Alright, let's go ahead and choose yes to close the spline, right click to exit the line tool, And with grid snap still enabled, let's go ahead and snap this over to the first helper. We can now press the S key to disable snapping, and let's go ahead and start to scale this down to the size we'd like to work with. All right, great. So I think this is going to work out well. Now what I'd like to do after scaling objects and adjusting their transforms is to go ahead and reset the transforms on these objects so we can avoid skewing issues. This is very important when we link to other objects. We most certainly want to go in and reset our X-forms and freeze transformations so again we don't run into any weird issues as far as scaling goes or any other issues that can be avoided had we have taken this step. So it's going to be reset X-form, reset selected, and then we want to make sure to get rid of the X-form modifier that's added when we reset. So to do that, we simply go back to our utility tab, we choose collapse. We want to use this first choice, modifier stack result, which will preserve the state of this object. So in this case, it's going to convert this spline into an editable spline. Let's choose collapse selected and take a look at that. And here we have it. All right, so from there, we'll want to alt right click and choose freeze transform to make sure that this is locked down. All right, great. And we can now go ahead and rename this to Flexi underscore CNT for connect, since this is primarily used to connect to a control rig, not necessarily to use as a control object, although it can be used as that. That's going to be Flexi CNT start, since this is at the start of our curve, followed by a 0, 1. All right, from there, let's go ahead and clone this object. Go ahead and just drag this copy out, holding down Shift. And we'll go ahead and rename this to Flexi CNT end 0, 1. All right, great. So we know that this needs to be snapped to the other end, so we could always press the S key and snap it over there. And at that point, pressing S again to disable snapping, with the object selected, we'll alt right click and choose freeze transform. All right, great. Now what I'd like to do is go in and recolor these objects. Color coding really helps to differentiate between the objects that we work with, especially for control rigs. So we could always use, let's say, a color of gold, something close to that for these objects. Great. We'll go ahead and do the same thing for the next curve. And we could also make sure to enable thickness. This just helps to make these objects easier to select. All right, so there's the thickness on one. We could always set this to about 0.5 or so it's not so large. We can do the same thing for the next curve. Go ahead and enable thickness if we'd like. Go ahead and set that to 0.5. All right, great. So that's looking nice. What we'll do is go ahead and stop the lesson here, and in the next lesson we'll go ahead and create the rest of our controls, and we'll also make sure to skin this line.